We really need to provide a meaningful relief to taxpayers across the country, and that's how we get more prosperity. Less spending, more prosperity. I'm trying to use more of that mantra. Maybe you can too within your post. Hello, welcome to this week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. I hope you're having a great new year to start 2025. We've got a lot to cover. A lot of legislative sessions are getting going. Here in Texas, where I live, they're getting going on January 14th. So tomorrow, whenever this comes out. And so I'm going to talk some about that. But look, across the country, we've got a lot of legislative sessions that are getting started, that they need to make sure that they're following a pro-growth approach to let people prosper. Remember, I've got my policy guide you can check out at vanceginn.com. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the big things that are happening this week that you don't want to miss. All right. So number one, Texas legislative session season starts. I told you it's a big one, right? In the news, tomorrow marks the start of the 89th Texas legislative session with many critical bills up for debate, including school choice legislation. And look, I mean, you have News 4 Oz, San Antonio is talking about this, KWTX and others talking about this, but it's big news in Texas. Not only the speaker race, which will be voted on the first day of session, and there's a lot of talk between Representative Chairman Dustin Burrows and also Representative David Cook. We'll see what happens with all of that. But once we get past some of the politics of all that happening, we've really got to get into the core fundamentals that are going to make Texas prosper more. Not just stick to the laurels of falling behind many other states when it comes to economic freedom and everything else, but really finding ways that are going to empower people across the state. And speaking of empowering Texans, let's talk about empowering parents. We must pass school choice for all students. Universal school choice should mean that every single student or parent who wants that ESA should be able to get it. And if we do this, then we can stop falling behind all the other states. More than 30 states have some sort of school choice program, and Texas doesn't have one. About 10 to 12 states have universal education savings accounts. That is really what is the gold standard for what should be done for education right now to improve student outcomes and to meet the unique needs of each one of these kids is passing universal school choice. And look, Texas and every state can do this and actually save money. Be fiscally conservative in the process by just moving to a model that says, you know what, we're going to give you X number of dollars. I think it should be $12,000 in Texas, for example. $12,000 is going to go to every ESA for every student across the state. Now they take that money and they can use it for a public school, private school, homeschool, co-op, whatever you need it for education related expenditures. And that can actually reduce the amount that you're paying compared to the $15,000, $17,000 per year that's currently being spent on government monopoly school system. You do that, and I think we have a substantial boom, not only in the economy because you can lower taxes, but also because you have better education and student outcomes. That's really what we need. At the end of the day, a lot of people are going to stay at the public school or the government school, as I like to call them, and that's fine. But that should be a choice of the individual, not money that's sent by politicians and bureaucrats to a particular institution based on their school district, area, but based on the demand for their product. Now, some schools, public schools may shut down, but that's a fault of their own, not a fault of of the state government, or not the fault of the parents. It's the fault of these schools who aren't meeting the needs of their kids because they don't have demand. Just like any private business would go out of business if they're not providing a good quality service. Same thing should happen to schools, okay? I'm not in favor of that necessarily. I do think that we should privatize as many schools as possible. We'd have a much better outcome in general, and that especially the federal government should get it out of school entirely, out of education, right? We need to close down the Department of Education at the federal level. But at the same time, if we're going to have some sort of provisions for education, it should go to meet the needs of the kids, not to something else where it's mainly become more of a job program for a lot of teachers and especially administrators. That's the really thing that gets me going is really all these administrators. Okay. So school choice is going to be an imperative for this session. Another imperative though is reducing spending and taxes. To really proclaim the leader that Texas is supposed to be an economic freedom and conservatism and everything else, Texas has got to spend less. we talk about California and New York and some of these big blue progressive states that are spending a lot. Texas is as well. And the more that you spend, the less money that you have the ability to provide for tax relief and tax cuts and everything else. So more money stays in the productive private sector overall. And I think that not only should you be looking at sustainable budgets by maximizing or having a maximum growth of population plus inflation, which I still think a fiscal rule is really important for every state and local governments and even the federal government to do, but you also want to make sure that you're looking at a frozen Texas budget that the Texans for Fiscal Responsibility have talked about, and I've written about there. So that way you have more in surplus to use a surplus trigger to reduce tax revenues and other places, reduce tax rates. And so I think by doing that, Texas in particular could phase out the school district M&O property tax, which is essentially a statewide property tax, by reducing the property tax rates. Some recent data from the Texas Comptroller's Office actually showed that the legislation that was passed in 2023, that there was an increase in property taxes across the state by 0.8%, which is what I've been saying for a number of months now. I got pushback from some folks in the state legislature for that. But now the latest numbers are out. These are the official numbers by the comptroller saying that property taxes went up by $700 million over the previous year. So they did not go down. School property taxes did go down by about 10%, but overall property taxes, which really hits our overall bill, actually went up 0.8%, making it the fourth slowest percentage increase since 1998. So it wasn't even the second best, which is I've been saying. It's actually the fourth best. That's not right. We've got to be doing something better. And I think that's done by capping those property taxes. So if you want to raise $1 of new property taxes by any locality, they should have to go to voters and finding ways to reduce these property taxes at the end of the day. Because remember, at the end of the day, we need property taxes to be eliminated. But that all starts by cutting government spending and restraining the growth over time, okay? We also need to reform licensing. Regulatory barriers are a big part that's keeping us from being as prosperous as possible in Texas and every other state. I think we should look at regulatory budgets and finding a way to capping the net cost for what these regulations are, or the number of pages, something that will start bringing this burden down, because regulations are stifling growth and choking off the economic potential for too many people, especially low income, low skilled folks across the country who they're supposedly helping. And so I think this is a key area that we've got to be focused in as well. In occupational licensing, most of them shouldn't be there at all. I'll be talking about quite a bit of this on later today, on Monday when this comes out, at 11 a.m. Central Time with the Texas Policy Research, where I'm a board member of. I'm joining Jeremy Kitchen to talk about a lot of these issues and others. You can find this link to it at my show notes page, vanceginn.substack.com, or go on Twitter, or X, right, formerly known as Twitter, to Texas Policy Research, and you can find that information there. Okay, number 2, Trump advocates for big bill. In the news, President-elect Donald Trump is urging Congress to swiftly pass his policy agenda, which includes tax cuts, border security, and reliable energy. One notable proposal is to exempt tip earnings from taxation, with a reduction in revenue from extending the Trump tax cuts and others by imposing tariffs. Okay. So my take on this is that we do need tax reform. We need to make permanent the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for individuals, or they're all going to see a massive tax increase. We should also find ways to reduce the corporate tax rate. If you look at the corporate tax rate at the federal level and the state level, we're over 25%, whereas the OECD average, the developed world really, is around 24%. So if you include all that, we're already above that. No wonder we're not as competitive as we should be. If we were able to make it 15% at the federal level, that would get us closer to about 20%, because about 4 to 5 percentage points for the state corporate taxes. And so that would put us well below the OECD average and allow us for us to have more prosperity in the process and really help out more economic growth. But I think that we also need to make sure that we're finding other ways to boost the economy. Just extending the Trump tax cuts is not really going to boost the economy, because those are already based in, right? Like those are already in our daily, we don't have any more money in our pocket, by the way. All right. But making the full expensing permanent, putting that back in place, reducing the corporate tax rate, flattening the income tax code. These are the ways that I think that we can really make a dent in the burden of taxes, while also making sure that we're spending less in the process. One thing I will keep mentioning, though, is that tariffs are a costly mistake. They should not be a way to bring in revenue from other places. All this is going to mean it's going to distort markets, reduce competition, and make our prices go up for a lot of things across the country. That's not a good idea. That's not a part of making things more prosperous. Remember, every tax destroys economic activity, no matter which tax it is. The question is which ones will have least burdens overall while still funding the government that we want. And tariffs just don't fall into that criteria, okay? What we should be doing, right, is instead for better policy reform is reducing excessive government spending, implementing pro-growth deregulation, simplifying the tax code with a flatter, lower rate structure, and not exempting taxes on tips and other narrow efforts, including imposing higher tariffs. All right, we need more free trade with our allies. We need to reduce the cost of doing business here. The more we do that, the more competitive we're going to be. So I hope that the Trump administration will consider those along the way. Number 3, last-minute Biden policy pushes. In the news, in the final days of President Biden's administration, a flurry of policies are being enacted. Among the last-minute changes are a permanent ban on offshore oil and gas drilling along the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, as well as increased Social Security benefits for public sector workers. What we really need to do with energy regulation is to unleash the economic potential of the country. I think that President Trump will do that within the first couple of days of his new administration, get rid of this ban on offshore drilling, and allow for there to be an opportunity to do that. Look, profit and loss system within capitalism provides the best opportunity to also to preserve and improve the environment across the country. That's not done by more socialism and more government actions, because then that will just mean that we'll give more competition to, or more advantage to other countries who do not have the same sort of technologies and innovation that we have in America. That will be even more harmful to the environment, while at the same time not benefiting Americans in the process. And so I think that we need a all of the above strategy. But that all of the above strategy will come down mostly to fossil fuel energy because renewables are so expensive and everything else. While at the same time, I think nuclear power will be a big part of this. What we can't get into the idea, though, like Texas and some other states are thinking, is to prop up or subsidize fossil fuels. I don't like that either. We should be getting rid of all of that sort of thing. That's crony corporatism. Let's get away from that. So I think the Biden administration has done a terrible job of regulation. Trump administration could come in, deal with that pretty quickly. Look, this Social Security Fairness Act that was passed into law to help for teachers and firefighters and others to get more in Social Security benefits based on when they were in the private sector is just another shell game that's going to further hurt the Social Security Trust Fund that's already going to go bankrupt or at least insolvent in a few years. And this could cost another $200 billion over the next decade from the Social Security Fairness Act. And these institutions like the firefighters and others, they chose not to be a part of the Social Security system. So why are we giving them handouts? At the same time, if we're giving them handouts, there shouldn't be 13th checks and other things from the state governments like in Texas, like they seem to do every time, to retire teachers because they're getting additional money from taxpayers that oftentimes they didn't even pay into the system. So I think this is a bad news, but it's already passed. So let's make the best that we can. And Biden's policy agenda, Bidenomics, is really a failure in so many ways. Massive deficits and debt, higher taxes, higher interest rates, higher regulations, all this stuff, stifled economic growth compared to what we otherwise could be. We really need to provide a meaningful relief to taxpayers across the country. And that's how we get more prosperity. Less spending, more prosperity. I'm trying to use more of that mantra. Maybe you can too within your post. All right. Number 4, Federal Reserve's future. In the news, with the Federal Reserve's vice chair for supervision stepping down, President-elect Donald Trump will have the opportunity to appoint an entirely new slate of bank regulators. This development raises critical questions about the future of the central bank. The future of the bank is pretty clear to me, is that we should end the Fed. But until we get there, we should find ways that are going to not distort or hamper free market principles, or that are going to undermine individual freedoms. That's what they've been doing for far too long. That's one reason why we've had massive inflation, higher interest rates, and bailing out the Congress from doing what they need to do, which is making tough decisions about entitlement reforms and spending less in the process. I think this new Fed chair, with this step down of the supervision, it allows for more opportunities for more people with better approaches of monetary rules, having limited regulation on banks and things of that nature could be a great opportunity. And in addition, Jerome Powell, the current Federal Reserve Chairman's term concludes in May 2026. That'll be here before we know it. So President Trump has an opportunity to really change up a lot of what's going on at the Fed. It'd be great to see someone who could be in that position if we're going to have the Fed, okay, that understands the power of sound money, that understands the cost of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Some folks like Judy Shelton, who I recently had on the podcast, John Taylor, they get this stuff. There's a lot of others out there as well, but we need a more free market approach. There's no reason for the Fed to have a $7 trillion balance sheet, which is nearly 25% of our total economy. It should be closer to maybe 6%, or if not less, which was before, which is where it was a percentage of GDP before the great COVID lockdowns that knocked everything out. Okay, so I think there's some good opportunities here for Trump. Even though the Fed should be independent as much as possible, there's some good ways for him to put the right people in charge to make these cases and allow for rules to direct what they're doing compared to discretion. I think that's really a direction we need to head, whether it's fiscal rules, monetary rules, regulatory rules. I think regulatory budgets would be another key part of that. So that's something else to look at. All right. And 5, property tax reform. In the news, in the new legislative cycle, many states such as Texas and North Dakota are considering property tax reforms. There are other states as well, Montana, I think Florida, Iowa. There's many states who are looking at doing sound policy reforms to property taxes and to allow for the burden of home ownership to be released. Look, I think that as long as we have property taxes, we are essentially renters from the government because we're paying rent for them, no matter if we pay off our mortgage, for the services that are being provided. And there's an argument that you have this local, connection between the services being provided and the local property tax. But I think that's been broken down because a lot of these systems now put liens on your house if you don't pay your property tax. That's not paying for the service. And nowadays, in this more modern economy in the 21st century, we have much better ways of paying for government than a property tax system. And I think that's more of a sales tax system compared to a property tax system. And you're still paying on those local sales taxes for local services, just through a different mechanism. And by the way, you also have a lot of people who are visiting, they come in and shop. They would pay for it. The drug dealers would pay for it whenever they sell into their drugs or whatever. The illegal immigrants would pay for it as well. So, there's a lot of other ways to bring in money to government. But at the same time, many of these local governments, the real reason why property taxes are so high, of course, is because they're spending too much. We need strong spending, state and local spending limits, just like we need at the federal level as well. And I think if we could do more of that and put in strict property tax caps that say if you want to raise your property tax $1, you've got to go out to the voters and allow for truth in taxation as well with more transparency. These are the types of things that will really reduce the burden of property taxes over time and not fall in the trap like Texas has done of reducing the school property tax, but all the other property taxes keep going up because there's too many loopholes in the system. And that's a way to eventually eliminate property taxes, which is what I want to do to allow for more prosperity overall. And last but certainly not least, we have American Jobs Outlook. In the news, new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows the United States national quit rate remains steady at 2.1% in 2024. This trend has been dubbed the quote-unquote great stay, contrasting with the quote-unquote great resignation of 2021-22. However, this stability may shift in 2025 as rising costs of living push workers to seek better opportunities and more flexibility. Another major factor shaping the labor market is the rise of artificial intelligence like AI, which is driving demand for technical roles, especially in AI-related fields. My take on this is that the current job market, which is the great stay, if some people are calling, reflects a tough economic climate where workers are hesitant to take risk and switch jobs. While the unemployment rate and other things may look low, as I mentioned before, these are masking a lot of what's going on under the scenes, which is one reason why I think people came out and turned out the way they did during the election to vote for Donald Trump compared to Kamala Harris. AI is impacting some of these jobs, but I think AI is going to be a revolution for us that allows for more jobs to come out that we've never known before. But that's just why policymakers must embrace this revolution rather than fear it and stop trying to impose all these new regulations like in Texas and the Triega and all these other things that are going on. These are following a progressive blue state mindset that have been passed in California and Colorado and tried in Connecticut, but it failed. Even Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado, said that their bill wasn't any good, but let's go ahead and pass it so we can transform it later. Texas doesn't need to follow in that sort of footsteps, all right? We need a deregulatory process and follow the rules that are on the books today instead of coming up with new ones. We'll be in a much better situation, and that way we can empower people to prosper, empower parents to educate and parent their kids, and empower employers to do what's best for their workers. I think these are the paths that we really need here in 2025. So thanks for joining me in this episode of This Week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com, and even greater value with a paid subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. God bless you, and let people prosper.